Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 10, Text 5. Tadvilokyabjasambhuto Vayuna yadadhisthitaha Padmam ambhascha tatkala Krutaviryena kampitam Tadvilokyabjasambhuto Vayuna yadadhisthitaha Padmam ambhascha tatkala Krutaviryena kampitam Tadvilokyabjasambhuto Vayuna yadadhisthitaha Padmam ambhascha tatkala Krutaviryena kampitam Tadvilokya, looking into that. Abjasambhutaha, whose source of birth was a lotus. Vayuna, by the air. Yat, that. Adhishthitaha, on which he was situated. Padmam, lotus. Ambha, water. Cha, also. Tatkala kruta, which was affected by eternal time. Viryena, by its inherent force. Kampitam, trembling. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Thereafter Brahma saw that both the lotus on which he was situated and the water on which the lotus was growing were trembling due to a strong, violent wind. Purport. The material world is called illusory because it is a place of forgetfulness of the transcendental service of the Lord. Thus, one engaged in the Lord's devotional service in the material world may sometimes be very much disturbed by awkward circumstances. There is a declaration of war between the two parties, the illusory energy and the devotee. And sometimes the weak devotees fall victim to the onslaught of the powerful illusory energy. Lord Brahma, however, was sufficiently strong by the causeless mercy of the Lord, and he could not be victimized by the material energy. Although it gave him cause for anxiety when it managed to totter the existence of his position. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjalishalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today morning, we continue our discussion on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Here, this pastime is moving forward, and after Brahma has performed austerities, has been blessed by the Lord, even after that he is facing a challenge that threatens to destabilize and disrupt, maybe even destroy everything that he is working for. The very lotus on which he is sitting is about to topple. It's shaking with the water. Even the water below is kampita, is experiencing an upheaval because of the sheer force of the wind. And he faces the situation. He's concerned, but he's not disturbed. He faces the situation by simply opening his mouth and swallowing all the wind. So now we might say, okay, if we just approach this from a very modern, contemporary, rational kind of mind, okay, what a strange story that there's a lotus on which a being appeared, and then a storm came and that being just devoured the storm. Well, it might just seem like a fanciful story. But Srila Prabhupada is showing us in the purport how we can understand and analyze and apply this. So I'll talk about 3 points today in terms of 3 A's. First, we'll talk about appreciation of the various ways in which scripture can be understood, and how Srila Prabhupada's commentaries are guiding us in that direction. Then second is analysis. So what does that mean for us for analyzing things? And last part I'll talk about application, about the particular incident that is going on over here. What does it, how can we apply it in terms of finding strength amid storms? So when scripture tells us stories, so there are 2 ways of looking at them. If you consider in terms of pendulum, literal, that this is exactly what happened, and that's all there is to it. So we could read the stories literally, and if we only read them literally, there could be several issues with it. It can seem quite simplistic, like it can be childish fiction stories. They can seem unbelievable. And say, what is the point of serious people investing serious thought in looking at these kind of stories? Even if we say they're historical, okay, it is something happened some long time ago. How is it relevant to me? Most importantly, it can seem irrelevant. Now, the other extreme is that some people go and try to interpret them metaphorically, wherein you try to look for the symbolic significance behind everything. That, okay, this means this, and this means this. And now, this can seem more sophisticated, more intelligent. Okay, we are looking for something universal. So now, there is a positive to this, that we can look for some relevance, some significance. So here, all these are negatives only, in one sense. But here there's a positive is, you can relevance or significance. We can try to look for that. But the negative of the metaphorical approach can be that we start thinking that these are just stories. They never occurred. The whole point of this is just to look behind or beyond. The story itself is not important. What is symbolized is more important. So this is almost like the impersonalist mentality, Well, Krishna is not important. The unborn beyond it, that is what is more important. So, this can be reductionistic. And it can often be depersonalizing. So, as if the stories themselves don't matter at all. Now, the actual truth is something in between. It's not just literal, it's not just metaphorical, it is metonymical. Now, metonym is an interesting concept. What metonym actually means is, if you consider the word White House. The White House declared that it will offer unconditional support to Ukraine in the war against Russia. Now, what does this mean? Is it that the White House suddenly came alive and started speaking? No. See, White House represents the US government, specifically the executive branch of the US government. Now, at the same time, there is a physical place called the White House. So, metaphor means what? There's a key difference. When there is a metaphor, there is some story, there is some point, and there is the meaning. So, in one sense, the story is just a tool. The story is unimportant. The meaning is the real thing. So, this is the idea of a metaphor. But in metonym, it's something different. Metonym is, there is some story, some point, some fact, and there is a reality beyond it. So, in metonym, the key to, like White House is a place that actually exists. But what White House represents is much more than that. So, if we consider the White House, this is real. And then if we consider the executive branch of the US government, that is also real. So yes, from here we want to go here, but it is not at the cost of neglecting or cancelling what is given. So in one sense you could say metonym means two things. One is, what is described is reality. And second is that reality is more than what is described. It is more than what is described. So the White House is real, but there is much more being described apart from the White House. So this, when suppose a ship is facing a storm and say all hands on the deck. Now that doesn't mean just you cut off the people's bodies and get their hands on the deck. Hands refers to people. But hands are used to refer to people over there. Because at that time, maybe we need the hands to steady the ship. So the idea is that when we talk about higher realities, like say if we consider this particular story that is being described, in the understanding of Vedic understanding, or especially the Bhagavatam understanding of how the universe evolved, that vision, this is reality. Brahma is an actual being that exists. And there is a primeval lotus from which the creation came about. But that is not all that is there to it. That there are historical realities, but through the historical realities, also universal realities are being conveyed. There are historical events, and from that, timeless themes, timeless teachings are being conveyed. And Srila Prabhupada's purport is focusing on those timeless teachings. So, we could consider, if this is the flow of history, there's a timeline. Now something happened, this happened at the dawn of creation. And now, say we are in 2023. So, what happened so long ago, millennia ago, how exactly is it relevant for us? So, actually, when we talk about the metonymical, we understand that this is real. But at the same time, the events that have happened over here, these events, while they are real, along with that, through these events, some timeless truths, principles, themes, they are being demonstrated. And they are what is of primary relevance for us. So what is the timeless theme? Now Prabhupada is taking this, in one sense, Prabhupada is taking it, so there are two words, there is non-literal or which is often equated with metaphorical, it doesn't have to be. But, so there is non-literal, which means, the literal is not true, something beyond is true. The symbol is not important, the symbolized is what is important. That's a non-literal idea. That the symbol just represents something. But that is not the reality. So, just to give a simpler example, to idea of, there's a difference between non-literal and there is transliteral. There's transliteral means it's more like metonymical. So now these two are not equal, they are not the same. Non-literal and transliteral. To give an example of this, say for example, now if you consider a country's flag. Say India, I come from India, India has a tricolor flag. So now if tomorrow India decides that, okay, the green color represents agriculture, we have become an industrialized economy now. We don't need green in the flag. So can the green color be deleted and the flag be changed to tricolor? Let's say the Australian flag has certain colors and certain stars and certain symbols. Can the government pass a resolution and decide, okay, maybe we don't want this symbol or we want to add this symbol. We want to change these things. It's changeable. So if you consider the country's flag, and suppose the country's flag is meant to remind a person of that country, to evoke some patriotism. So the patriotism is what is important. The country's flag, okay, you can have one flag today, you can have second flag tomorrow. And the first flag can be revoked. It doesn't matter. What really matters is the patriotic feeling that is to be evoked. So that is the idea. This is something like non-literal. Not exactly, because the flag is existing. But the flag is not what is important. What the flag symbolizes is important. But suppose we love someone. And then there is the photo of the person. There is the photo and the person. Now, there is a link between the photo and the person also. But, suppose a husband is working somewhere far away from the home, and a husband comes back home, and the wife is maybe taking his clothes for laundry, or she looks in his wallet, and she sees there's a photo of some other different woman apart from her over there. He says, what is going on? He says, no. Actually, I am remembering you only. I just put her photo there. No, that doesn't work, isn't it? There is an intrinsic connection between the photo and the person. You cannot replace the photo and say it's pointing to the same person. Because the photo represents the person directly. That connection is much deeper. Now, of course, the person is much more than the photo. But you cannot have photo 1 and photo 2 of a separate person. That will point to a separate person. That doesn't point to the same person. So when we say non-literal, that means what is the literal doesn't matter also. What is beyond it only matters. But transliteral means that this is real, but there is something more than that which is also real. Like Prabhupada, when he talks about the Kurukshetra war, that Prabhupada says the war actually happened. That's where the Bhagavad Gita was spoken before the war. But the Bhagavad Gita's teachings are not simply to get Arjuna to fight a war. The Gita's teachings are about much, much more. They are about universal principles. So the point I'm making is that sometimes we as devotees may be mistaken to be literalists. Because we say what scripture says is true. And yes, it is true. But there is a sophisticated commentary, a sophisticated mode of analysis. Especially Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about this in several of his books, Chaitanya Shikshamrit, and to some extent in Krishna Samhita. So it's what our understanding is, it's not literal, it's much more than literal. It is, but it just much more than literal means not that it is not literal. There's literal and there is more. It's transliteral. Especially with respect to the Bhagavad Gita, if we insist that it is literal, we can run into problems because people may say, oh, then the Bhagavad Gita is a book spoken by Krishna to incite a peace-loving Arjuna to fight. So the Gita is a book of violence. Well, not really. The Gita is not a book of violence. If you consider the Gita's message, if we take it literally, it might seem it is a message of violence. Now there are some Gita commentators who decided, so if we take it literal, the message is violence. There are some Gita commentators, a prominent Gita commentator from India, who actually try to read the Gita to say that it teaches non-violence. He's a prominent Indian national leader. And to do that, what did he have to say? He said that actually Vyasadeva used this as a metaphor, and actually it is a very bad metaphor. Why? Because people will not understand it's a metaphor and they will take it literally. So now if you say it's non-violence, that takes it as metaphorical. But the actual message of the Gita is not of violence, not of silence. It is of transcendence. Transcendence means that we don't just think in terms of, okay, I want to fight or I don't want to fight. The Gita's message is, I want to do the divine will. Karishye vachanam tava. We transcend our normal concerns, normal calculations, and we focus on how can I do God's will. In fact, that is the conclusion in the Gita, that is 1873. I will do your will. Karishye vachanam tava. And this is actually metonymical. So, of course, in that particular context, in the context of the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, doing God's will meant fighting for Arjuna. But the core message of the Gita is not take up weapons and fight. At least not fight a physical war. And that's why we see so many of the Gita commentators, whether it is Ramanujacharya or Madhvacharya or Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur or Baldev Vidyabhushan. Now, all these commentators, they lived in India under the shadow of the Islamic invasion and predation of India. And yet none of them in their commentary said that, oh, Islam is terrible and we have to destroy these Islamic rulers. That is the application of the Bhagavad Gita. No, they didn't do that. Because that is not the core point of the Bhagavad Gita. The core message of the Bhagavad Gita is that we should harmonize with the will of God. So, I just give this as one example of that if we take everything literally, or if we convey to people that we are literalists, then we can run into a lot of antagonism or alienation, where we make it more difficult than what it needs to be for people to appreciate and come closer to Krishna. So that's the first point that I said I'll talk about three things. Appreciation, appreciating that scripture can be understood at multiple levels. There is a literal level of understanding, but beyond that there is a universal level of understanding also. So that brings us to the second point. And the second point I'll talk about is analysis. So this class, as many of you noticed, it's a little philosophical, but I think I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. In literary theory, in the study of literature basically, there is the concept of ladder of abstraction. Ladder of abstractions means, see, at the bottom of this ladder, we have specifics. And specifics means specific details we have. And at the bottom of the ladder, we have abstract principles. So, what do we mean by abstract principles? Say, for example, if we consider science, Newton saw the apple fell, or some people say, felt the apple fell on his head, fall on his head. And that was a specific event. Now, if instead of Newton, a monkey had been there, that monkey just had picked the apple, eaten, and gone on its own way. But Newton thought, okay, what is this? What caused this? What's the principle over here? And that's how we inferred the principle of gravity. So generally, if we consider a movie is going on or a novel is going on and some dramatic action is going on, maybe this person is fighting that person, the scene itself can be captivating. But then after the scene is going on for some time, you want to know, okay, who is fighting? Who are these people? Why are they fighting? What is the cause over which they are fighting? And the cause may be, okay, it may be power, it may be position, it may be battle between good and evil. Now that is abstract. So why am I talking about this is that the specific details can be entertaining, they can be interesting. That's what catches people's attention. But it is the abstract principles that are illuminating, that give us something to learn. So that an apple fell on somebody's head, okay, that's entertaining if you had seen that apple fall. But okay, what does it? Does it mean something? That is what makes it illuminating. So in general, when we are to understand scripture, often scripture gives specific details. And from those details, we need to abstract principles. So what is the principle in this particular story? That question is what helps us ensure that we don't get caught in the specifics. So this is something similar to literal. The specifics are literal. Going back to our earlier analytical frame, the specifics are literal. The abstract principles are not, I won't say they're non-literal, they are transliteral. So we need to go from the literal specifics to the transliteral principles. And that is what helps us understand what is going on over here in a way that is relevant for us, that is illuminating for us. So for example, if we apply this ladder of abstraction to this particular pastime, which is actually what Prabhupada is doing. Prabhupada may not use the word ladder of abstraction, but that is what Prabhupada is doing. The specific detail is, so Brahma's lotus seat is shaking. That's the specific detail. And Prabhupada is drawing from that the universal principle. A devotee's position is unsteady. What position? A devotee's spiritual position. Say, we by our spiritual practices have to some extent risen above the material world. We have risen above material consciousness. At least to some extent. We are following some practices. We are risen above that. So, that is the universal principle that Prabhupada is drawing from here. So if we consider, okay, this looks more like a tree than a lotus flower. Anyway, forget it. Just you imagine this is a lotus. So this is like the devotee's position, which is above the material world to some extent. This lotus may be small, maybe high, to whatever extent we have practiced it. Now what has happened is a powerful stormy wind is coming. That stormy wind is often of temptation. Or it could be of tribulation. So the two broad things that can shake our devotion. Temptation means, oh, there's so much pleasure there if I just give up Krishna. And tribulation is, in spite of being with Krishna, if there is so much trouble, what is the point of being with Krishna? So in general, on the spiritual journey, so the two things that can shake us off. If you are on the journey to Krishna, so on this journey to Krishna, there's one thing that can pull us away, another thing can push us away. That is temptation. Oh, if you just give this up, there's so much pleasure available out there. And then there is tribulation. That what is the point of doing this when God is not protecting, when Krishna is not protecting me? I'm doing so much for Krishna and Krishna is not protecting me. What is the point of doing this? So the storm can be of temptation or of tribulation. So Prabhupada is talking about this universal principle. He's going up the ladder of abstraction and he's saying that when there is the storm that appears, when the storm shakes a person, shakes a devotee. So now what is Brahmaji able to do? He is able to find the strength by which the storm does not topple him. So similarly, we have to find that strength. So in the stormy wind of temptation now, the third point that Prabhupada will talk about is that Brahmaji is swallowing the wind. That is like a devotee tolerating a temptation or tribulation. Tam stitikshasva bharata. Both temptation and tribulation have to be tolerated. Krishna says in 2.14 that tam stitikshasva, tolerate. But what tolerate? Sukha and dukkha. Both the promise of pleasure and the threat of trouble. Both need to be tolerated. So Srila Prabhupada is giving here a non-literal meaning of this, or more precisely, a trans-literal meaning of this. So this is where things become universal. And then that brings us down, okay, that's a universal principle. Now, how does this apply to me? That's the last part I'll talk. So analysis means we need to go from the bottom of the ladder of abstraction to the top of the ladder, so that we get some universal principle. But after we go up that ladder of abstraction, from there actually we need to come down another ladder. Now what does this mean? That, okay, I got some timeless principle, but how does this apply to me? Okay, so I am facing some storm right now. Where can I get the strength by which I can face the storm? So we could say that the specific, from the specific we go to the universal. So this is you could say this is a historical specific. That means ancient specific. But so we go up this ladder and then we come down this ladder. So this is the contemporary specific. What does it mean today? What does that point mean today? Now Prabhupada does this on many occasions without going through this elaborate analytical process. And when Prabhupada does that, sometimes we might miss it, or sometimes we might miss what Prabhupada is doing. As for example, if we consider the 15.6 verse in the Gita, na tat bhasayate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yad katva na nivartante tad dhama paramam mama. Now, in the Sanskrit, there are three things that are referred to. Na tat bhasayate suryo, shashanko, that is the moon, and fire. Three things. That spiritual world is not illuminated by the sun, the moon, or fire. Now, Srila Prabhupada, in his translation, lists these three, but he adds electricity. Now, somebody may say, there is no electricity in the Sanskrit. What is going on? How is this being added over here? So, it is Prabhupada actually making that purport intelligible for us. So, if we consider the same, going up and down the ladder of abstraction, so what is the principle? So the specifics here are there: the sun, moon, and fire. So that abode is not illuminated by the sun, moon, fire. That is talking about the spiritual world. So what is the universal principle over here? That it is self-luminous. That means it does not depend on any external source for illumination. That is often contrasted with the material world, where if we don't have some source of illumination, it's dark. So here, when we are talking about the nature of the spiritual world, which is what is being described of the spiritual world in 15.6. So now that point, that it is self-luminous, no dependence on external sources of light, of luminosity. So that is the key point that is being talked about. Now in today's world, for most people, okay, the sun, moon and fire are sources of illumination, but that is more like historical. For most people, if it's dark, turn on the power. The primary source of illumination for most people today is electricity. So what Prabhupada is doing is, he is coming down this ladder of abstraction. And that's why, along with sun, moon and fire, Prabhupada adds electricity over here. So this electricity, it is not just something randomly added by Prabhupada. Prabhupada is making the core point accessible. So the point is to get the point across. The point is to get the point across. That means the point is to explain what is happening in a way that is relevant, that is intelligible. That's what will make the scripture come alive. Otherwise, okay, without Prabhupada's purports, okay, how many of us would have found really scripture relevant? Okay, just some stories, some abstract ideas, some philosophy, some stories. It wouldn't have been relevant. The point is not just to tell the point. The point is to get the point across, to make it intelligible. Across means to make it intelligible, to make it applicable. Intelligible means first it makes sense, and applicable means then we can use it in our life to make our life better. So that is the expertise of Prabhupada. So for example, in the 7th canto there is a verse, Jivvaikto achyuti karchati ma vitrupta. That Prahlad Maharaj is depicting the position of a conditioned soul, and he's saying that I am being pulled by my various senses in various directions, just as a man might be pulled by multiple wives. So that is the verse itself. But he says, okay, the eyes are attracted to beautiful objects, the ears are attracted to sweet music, the tongue is attracted to delicious foods. Now Prabhupada says over there, the ears are attracted to radio songs. Now, were there radio songs at the time of Prahlad? Was Prahlad referring to radio songs? Well, no. At that time, During Prabhupada's time, radio music was just becoming popular in India, it was becoming big. So Prabhupada is making that relevant. Maybe now we might say the ears are attracted to YouTube music or Spotify music or whatever. We might use something different. But the point is to get the point across. So how do we get the point across? We go up and down this ladder of abstraction. And to the extent we can do that, this going up and down the ladder of abstraction can be summarized through the acronym OM. OM can be written as OM OM, but it's more AUM OM. So OM is the actual context. What actually happened, what we accept that it happened, but what is the universal principle? And then what does it mean in the modern context, in today's context? So what does it mean in its actual context? What is the universal principle, and how does that principle apply in our context today? So this tool, if we apply, then scripture can be made relevant to us. Scripture can come alive for us. So I'll conclude with the last part now. I said that I'll talk about appreciating Prabhupada's strategy, analyzing what this means, and then application. So for each one of us, we are going to face storms in our spiritual life. And when we face storms, what do we do? Now, if we consider our bhakti and our life at large, there are some activities that are positive in the sense that they give strength to us. And there are some activities that are negative, that means they take strength or they require strength. So this can happen with respect to people also. There are some people whom we just love to be with. Being with them, spending time with them, it cheers us up, it enlivens us, it inspires us, it makes us want to face life and do our services with much more enthusiasm. And there are some people, it's like as soon as they come, it seems as if they just suck all the oxygen out of the room. When they come into the room, we feel as if now we have walked into a minefield. What word will cause an explosion, I don't know. So, and after the time when that meeting gets over, it has taken so much of our strength. Now, inevitably, we will have both kinds of people in our life. We can't avoid that. I was in Florida and I was visiting one devotee's house for a program, and they had put a quote on their wall as soon as you enter the house. All our guests make us happy. Some by arriving and some by departing. So now what applies to people also applies to activities. For all of us, there will be certain situations, certain activities which will take our strength, which will erode our strength, which will leave us feeling weak and exhausted. So it is our responsibility to make sure that these two are at least equal. Preferably that the activities that give strength are not just equal but more than the activity that takes strength from us. So we have to do certain services. In life, it won't be possible that we will always be with people whom we like. In life, it's not possible that we will get to do only the services or the activity that we like to do. We have to do things which it's not just a matter of liking and disliking, it's a more a matter of how it affects us. Some things may be actually good for us also. Say for example, now chanting is purifying for us. But suppose our mind wanders a lot in chanting. And after finishing the chanting, I just feel, okay, I feel exhausted. And it's possible that might happen. But then we have to find out, okay, what are the activities that give me strength? Maybe worshipping the deities give me strength. Maybe participating in Kirtan gives me strength. Maybe hearing some good classes gives me strength. So we need to find out what are the activities that give us strength and make sure that we do those activities sufficiently So we draw strength from the activity that give us strength, and then we can use that to do the activities that require strength for us. So Brahmaji had earlier performed the austerities. From the austerities that he had performed, he had got strength. And now he used that strength to face the storms that are going to come to him. So the specific might be mystical. Oh, there's a storm that came in and he swallowed it up. The specific may not be applicable for us, but again, go up the ladder of abstraction. The principle is he did the activities that gave him strength. So for all of us also, we don't know what the future holds. But that does not mean that we have to be uncertain or we have to be fearful. Because although we don't know what the future holds, we know who holds the future. We know it is Krishna who holds the future. And if we hold on to Krishna, if right now in the present we are doing the activities by which we are holding on to Krishna firmly, then whenever in the future some storm comes, we will hold on to Krishna and Krishna will hold on to us in reciprocation. And that way, just as Brahmaji survived the storms that came in his life, in our life also, the storms that may come, we will be able to survive. Not only survive, maybe even thrive through them. So, if you consider the future, what the future holds, that we can't know. But who holds the future? That we can know, that we do know, and therefore we hold on to him in the present. Right now, even if I feel that I don't have any situation which requires a lot of strength, my life is fine. But unfortunately, the nature of the world is, even if things are fine today, they are not likely to be fine always. So in the present, we need to prepare for the future. And the best way to prepare for the future is by connecting with Krishna. By doing right now the activities that give us strength, so that when we need that strength, that will be available for us. And that's how we will be able to succeed. We will be able to survive and succeed. One of my friends is in the army, so he says they have a slogan over there that the more you sweat in peace, the less you will bleed in war. That in peacetime, if you're training properly, it's sweat. You have to sweat. But when you're doing that, then you will be that much more trained, that much more alert, that much more equipped. And that same principle applies for our spiritual fire also. We are fighting a war against Maya. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. So that is the timeless principle that we can apply and see our sadhana, see our practices as spiritual practices as sweating in peace, so that we will have to, when the storms come, we will bleed less in the war. So I'll summarize. I talked about 3 points today mainly. The first was, I talked about appreciation. That when we study scripture, we don't just see it simply as literal or metaphorical. We see it as metonymical. Metonymical means what is described as reality, but reality is also more than what is described. So, give the example of, say, White House. So, or in this case, we talk about Brahma's situation. So, it's what is described as real, but but reality is more than what is described. That means that there is something universal being taught over here. If we take it only literally, then people think it's so naive, it's so unbelievable. It's only metaphorical, and the history and its value is lost. So now what does metonymical mean, or how do we apply that? I talked about analysis. That means we learn to go up the ladder of abstraction. That from where we are, at the bottom of the ladder are specifics. And specifics can be entertaining, but it is the universals, the abstract principles that are illuminating. So that's what helps us learn something. So Prabhupada, we discussed several examples of Prabhupada going not only up the ladder of abstraction, but going up and down. So that was where, to apply, what we do is, application means we go up and down that ladder. So the actual context, what does this mean in the actual context? Okay, this event happened. But what is the universal, the time context independent principle over here? And how can that principle be applied in the modern context? And then we discussed Prabhupada's example of 15.6, Prabhupada's example of radio songs. And we also discussed in this particular context how Brahmaji got strength. That means we balance our activities between those activities that give strength and those activities that require strength. So we make sure that we keep ourselves strong enough to face life's storms. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, please.
Hare Krishna. First of all, thank you for your illuminating class. I have a question about like the interpretations that we see that is made, for example, by our acharyas about different pastimes of Krishna, for example, what represents different demons and a lot of things. We can see that they add extra information or interpretations, you could say. My question is about what happens in our own real life as devotees, in our spiritual progress. Is that also possible, like to give some interpretations or significance, try to, you could call it speculate, or this happens because of that, like try to add extra understanding or depth or some abstract principles or something? Does it make sense?
Okay, yeah, good question. So, if we see that our acharyas have given some explanations. So, taking inspiration from that, can we also give some explanations, add some understanding? Well, not only we can, but we need to. Why? Because if you consider Srila Prabhupada, how does he define realization? Realization, he says in the first canto, the 4th chapter, that no unscrupulous meaning should be screwed out of it. That we don't just take something that is not here. But at the same time, he says, present in a way that is interesting to the audience. These two things simultaneously Prabhupada says. So what does this mean? We want to look at this in a practical perspective. Say this is scripture. Now scripture itself is timeless. It is, if you consider the thread of timeline, scripture is timeless. But in human history, there are at different times, could say, different topics that are of interest to people. And this keeps changing throughout history. So, these are interesting topics. So, for example, when Srila Prabhupada is talking about the Ishopanishad, it says Ishavasya Midam Sarvam. Everybody should accept. Nobody should take beyond their quota. And there he talks about, say, the Cold War. But unless they understand that everything is the property of God, the war will go on. So what is Prabhupada doing over here? Prabhupada is finding the intersection between the timeless and the timely. Now, maybe today the same Cold War is not so relevant. The Cold War is more or less over after at least the Cold War as it was known. It is over after the fall of the Soviet Russia in 1989. So now today we could apply, say, there's a war between Ukraine and Russia. And you could say it's a war between America and Russia with Ukraine as a proxy, but whatever it is. But we could apply that same principle. Now Prabhupada doesn't talk about that. Scripture doesn't talk about the war between Ukraine and Russia. But you can say the same principle that unless people understand that God is the proprietor ultimately, the things are violence is going to recur. So is that speculation? I won't call it speculation, that's realization. So it's important for us, otherwise scripture will not be relevant. What makes scripture relevant is that we take the timeless and we link it with the timely. And it is the responsibility of each one of us to do that. So now, is there a danger of speculation? And of course there is danger. That's why we don't want to go in this quadrant where we're just simply speaking contemporary issues without any scriptural illumination in it. That will just be mundane prajal kind of thing. But if we're taking contemporary issues and showing how they link with scripture, that is necessary. See, in general, what the acharyas have given, now that should not become like a barrier between us and scripture. What the acharyas have given is like a bridge to help us link with scripture, to understand scripture. I'm not using bridge in the sense that you cross over the bridge and you no longer need the bridge. That's not the point. But the bridge it's something which links us with it. So if we say this is the wall, this is the scripture, and this is the purport is like a wall. This is the only meaning, no other meaning. Okay, this wall is here, this wall is here, this wall is here. Okay, there are the 5 acharyas in our tradition, and these are the 5 walls, and that's all you can see. You cannot see anything beyond that. That's not the point. In fact, if we consider from a practical perspective, it's an important question, so I'll quickly answer this in another perspective. Let's say when the pandemic happened. Now, we continued our outreach through online, primarily through Zoom and things like that. Now, is there any single precedent of any acharya giving a class on Zoom? Satsang meant physical satsang. There's no precedent at all. Now, if we had said that, this is all speculation, this is all deviation, well, all outreach, all satsang would have stopped. The pandemic would have been far more spiritually damaging than what it was. So, what did we do? The purpose remains the same. But the purpose is to share spiritual wisdom. The means by which we fulfill that purpose vary. So that same principle, the message is the same, but the connections that we make with the message, they will vary. So that they not only will vary, they will have to vary. So as long as we are teaching scripture, connecting it is fine. Now, if we are giving some radically new insights, then maybe it is best to talk with senior devotees, see what they say. And then, if they feel, this particular matter, we are giving this particular example, maybe this is not the best example over here. And they'll say, this is why, okay. You are thinking this example could mean this, but this example could also mean something like this. So, we consult devotees. Bodhayantaha parasparam. In that way we can learn. And that way we can share. So, we certainly want to avoid speculation. But in the name of avoiding speculation, we don't want to make ourselves irrelevant. We want to keep, Prabhupada wanted us to be relevant. And that's what, it is our realizations that make scripture relevant. In fact, you could say, this applies to the Gita or it applies to the Bhagavatam. The Gita lives through those who live the Gita. The Gita lives through those who live the Gita. So that means those who can make the Gita relevant today, that's how the Gita lives through them. Otherwise, okay, the Gita was just a book which spoke a few thousand years ago, and for some time people considered important. But now it has become outdated. So it is important for us to keep it relevant. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Jai Gaur Premanande. Hari.